Okay, marvelous. Well, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. Um, so what we're going to do is we'll record this and we'll publish the video along with the video that you've produced. And
Okay.
so they'll kind of be in companion pieces, hopefully spelling out much more of what you're up to. And we'll also have the audio transcribed so that we'll be able to have it published.
Okay.
On the
Yeah, and
website.
if you, I didn't, we didn't do preparation questions. If there's something that I need to go to the team with and come back to you with a more thoughtful answer, I'm happy to follow up and do that.
Totally fine. Totally fine. So let's just start with you and a little bit of background on you, and then we'll get to the Aromatic Plant Resource Center and the video itself. But great, let's start with the talking head in the video and you.
Sure. Okay.
So where are you from and what you up to?
I'm originally from New York. I'm second generation from both sides of my family immigrating from Germany, Poland, Italy, and Albania through New York.
Yep,
So,
we're trapped in my family too.
Yeah, so I'm a real New Yorker, and I moved up to Vermont because of 9/11. So I've been living here in Vermont since then, and I couldn't imagine calling any other place home now at this point.
Yeah, certainly. I lived in New York for a while pursuing a theater career, and when I imagined just being stuck in my apartment during this particular time versus being in the woods in Vermont, I'm very grateful for my life choices for sure.
Exactly, yeah.
And so what's your background?
So my background is in environmental sciences. I have a PhD from the University of Vermont in environment and natural resources. But I'm just a tree hugger. And I was, as a little kid, I lived in a really unstable household. And at a very young age, I used to go outside and hang out with the trees. And as a kid, your imagination flies. And so I would talk to them and they would talk to me. And I had a whole relationship with trees that it really, literally, no pun intended, it planted a seed in me.
Yep.
Of such love and admiration for the resilience of plants and trees, but a deep connection to nature and that feeling of safety and wonder and amazement at the intricacies of nature only got stronger through studying science. So for me, science only strengthened some of the spiritual aspects of my connection to nature rather than disproving something. It more strengthened just because of the amazing wonder that nature is and how systems work in a web of life together. I feel like us humans have a lot to learn about ourselves to reintegrate with our natural world, which we are nature.
Yeah.
The people have been using the slogan, "We're all in this together," during the Corona epidemic. And I was playing around with that, and I was trying to find a way to insert nature in there. So I said, well, we're all nature in this together, because truly we are. And the more that we understand our partnership with nature instead of trying to dominate nature, we can have a whole different reality between us interpersonally as people and with the planet. And so plants are my happy place. They bring me a lot of amazement and just a lot of joy.
Oh, that's wonderful. I totally relate. I grew up in suburban Portland, Oregon, and we had about a 1/4 acre backyard, and my dad planted probably 35 pine trees to try to kill off the lawn because he hated mowing the grass. And I had a personal individual relationship with each of those trees in the backyard, and I would go around and check in with them and see how they were doing. I totally understand. I want to get to what you're doing in the video, but because we are in the context of this larger pandemic, which is nestled inside the larger context even of the climate crisis, I spent a good couple dozen years in the climate movement. I mean, not
Yeah.
24, but like a good over a decade doing climate activism. So, and working with my town's transition initiative. And so what we're experiencing right now, while emotionally impactful and in many ways shocking, it's not as much of a surprise to me as I would imagine for someone who hasn't spent a whole lot of time thinking about the longer term impacts of humanity on the planet.
Agreed.
So how are you personally sort of contending with all of this? Because, clearly this is something that you probably understand and have anticipated.
Yeah.
And yet,
I'm surprised it took this long, actually. And I mean, one of the things that really is a wake-up call to me is the fact that our food systems are taking such a big hit. And I do a lot, of course, working with plants, also working around food systems and resiliency and how farming can be ecologically sustainable so we can have food and also have forests. Yeah. And hemp's a great plant in that matrix, so we'll talk more about that. But the way that I'm dealing with it is looking for ways to strengthen myself and to keep myself healthy, because it's really easy to get mentally unhealthy even if I did expect something like this, right? So sticking to my regular health stuff like sleeping and meditating and doing yoga, spending a lot of time outside. Now that's a luxury that I have because I live in a town outside of Burlington up in the mountains. That wasn't easy over the last 19 years because it's pretty far from everything. I suffered quite a bit of isolation sometimes. Now, I mean, as I've gotten older, I'm just so grateful for that. So I do have that long worked for luxury of being able to be in nature here where I live, because I live in a remote location. Yeah. And that has really helped me with my mental health, as well as connecting with people. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm having regular Zoom calls and phone calls, working with some of the college students. And when I teach, because I do a lot of guest lecturing and public speaking, a lot of people have reached out to me to ask me, what do I do right now? I'm just about to graduate college. What do I do? And so being there to help others helps me not think about my own problems, which is very healthy to give to others and to help others so that you're not just so focused on yourself. Yeah. It's a good thing to do sometimes too, but I really always, when you help others, you really help yourself too.
Yeah, for sure.
So
I know I'm taking us a little far afield, but I'm so curious about all this. So I feel like I know that I live in a little progressive bubble, and I don't doubt that I self-select for the kind of news that I want to read. And
sure.
That said, I do feel like there is a greater collective understanding that part of the reason why this is happening is that our systems are unsustainable. And there's a recognition that we are going to have to reinvent a lot moving forward in order to keep ourselves healthy and resilient collectively. Yeah. Do you think that's just me, or do you see that?
Oh, no, that's not just you. I mean, that's really already woven through the younger generations. They're quite aware, and I know this a lot from having been a former professor and spending a lot of time around millennials and Generation Z, and they already know that they sort of got left holding the bag, right? And so a lot of what I have focused on, especially with those young minds, is yes, here's the problem, but let's not just leave it right there, because then, you're just like, whoa, over. Let's work on the solutions. Mm-hmm. And what I find time and time again is that we really know and have a lot of the solutions. We know how to do agroecological farming. We know how to produce renewable energies. The technology and the methodologies are not what's lacking.
Right.
Really what's lacking is the will of us in groups to come together and to partner instead of dominate. We've really bought into culturally domination as a paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is somebody over somebody else. Somebody has to win. Somebody has to lose. We're better than nature. We're not a part of it, so we have to dominate it. These kind of concepts have left us sorely lacking the kind of skills we need socially to just actually act on the methodologies and the technologies that we have and that we know are effective to combat climate change, to grow food ecologically, to live healthier lives. It's really, I like to say, humans made these problems.
Right.
We did this, right? We made these problems. So that's bad news. That's kind of a burden, but it's really good news because it means we can change them.
Yeah.
Right. So if it was like, well, a meteor's coming at us and, that's not my fault. I didn't do that. The meteor's just coming, like, oh God, we can't do anything about it. But this is actually a situation that we could do something about. And it literally starts inside each and every person. Because if people have a bad self-image about themselves, or they have a negative paradigm about the world around them, the results are going to be negative. Mm-hmm. And so I like to do a lot of interpersonal work with young environmentalists or environmentalists of any age in terms of really being able to be at peace with yourself and to love yourself, so that then you can do that in groups. Yeah. And then those groups can then affect change on a large scale. And so it really is an interpersonal exercise in self-love to be able to build up, to partner with others.
Yeah. And that if you do that work yourself, you're a lot less likely to bring oppressive dynamics into group situations. You're a lot less likely to be blind to your own reflexive attitudes about things. You're going to be a lot more conscious about your prejudices and whatever baggage you're carrying on a more unconscious level. You'll be able to, or at least accept, when it's pointed out, acknowledge and accept it.
Yeah, to respond instead of react.
Yeah, and pulling your ego out of the way enough so that you can say, oh, yes, I'm sorry, I made that mistake. I apologize. And let's move on, as opposed to falling into your own morass of self-loathing.
Right. If you're loving yourself properly, you get more and more humble.
Yeah.
Really. You have a healthy self-image. So you you love yourself, but it's a humble loving. It's not a conceited loving.
Yeah.
When you get groups of people together who are kind to themselves and loving to themselves, have a good self-image, those people can come together in teams and groups and they're unstoppable. Yeah. Because otherwise then you get that competing and, people reacting to each other instead of responding. And really, this is the stuff that holds us back. This is really the stuff that holds us back.
Yeah.
So, plants, I've learned a lot of that from watching nature, to be honest. Now I study personal development and I did a lot of psychotherapy and have confronted a lot of my own issues to be a better environmentalist and also just to be at peace with myself. But when I reflect on nature and I watch how resilient nature is and how I know there's parasitic relationships, but more often than not, they're mutualistic.
Yeah.
And they tend to work together within their own species and even across species more often than having war with each other.
Right.
And that's how they come together in plant communities to create these incredibly dynamic ecosystems that can take so much. They can take tsunamis, they can take hurricanes, they could take lightning strikes, they could take all kinds of environmental abuses, and they're still resilient and they bounce back.
Yeah.
Fires, then they bounce right back. So, yeah.
Beautiful. And so, not to promote a moment of self-aggrandizement. So, what's your PhD in? What were you studying?
Environmental sciences.
Okay, with a specific focus on.
My specific focus at the time was on women's empowerment and development.
Awesome.
So, I've done a lot of crossover with ecofeminism and environmental issues, but I've worked in the field for about 30 years in different countries, working a lot in post-conflict situations. Like I worked in Sierra Leone for several years. I've worked in Somaliland and Somalia for almost 10 now, and working on issues around the environment. And after conflicts, the environment is often in pretty tough shape, right? After there's been civil war, conflict, a lot of times the environment is quite destroyed. And so working on environmental restoration or protection of natural assets in an unsure time in a country's reemergence after a conflict is a particularly vulnerable yet powerful time for major shifts and major dynamic changes, because it's a new dawn, right? The conflict's over. People are in a hard situation, but they want things to get better.
Right.
And so I've done a lot of work in my years in the field. And so I was kind of a late bloomer with a PhD. I got my PhD in my 40s, which, quite a few folks go right through, or they're finished up in their 30s. But that's because I was a working professional and I was doing this kind of work with NGOs and the UN and different funders in the field. And I've never wanted to do science just for the sake of science or to prove that I'm smart or something. For me, school is, I love learning. And I love being in classrooms, and I love, learning from professors. I like all that kind of stuff. And so for me, it was to make me a more effective environmentalist.
Okay.
And how can I use the knowledge and apply it very strategically and be active about making environmental changes. And often that does also mean empowering women, because a lot of times you see parallels where women are being oppressed or abused, and the environment is as well. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of parallels in ecofeminism that show that. And so,
and certainly Paul Hawkins' work has shown that in terms of, some of the most important things you can do to lower, to address climate change have to do with women's economic empowerment, educating women and girls, right at the top of the list. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So how did you land at the Aromatic Plant Research Center?
Yeah. So 3 years ago, I was back in Somalia working on protection of the frankincense trees. And we're getting a fair amount of attention from some major media outlets. And so the Aromatic Plant Research Center reached out to me and asked me to become a board member, which I very happily accepted, because it's an amazing group of scientists working on different aromatic and medicinal plant species. And I was just really excited to join the team. So it's about 2.5 years now that I've been at APRC, and a lot of my work until starting to open up some of APRC's activities have been around frankincense and working on, and do you know what frankincense is, maybe for the audience?
I have a guess, but I will let you describe.
Okay, well, when you hear the word frankincense, a lot of people in the West remember back to the biblical story of the wise men bringing frankincense, myrrh, and gold to baby Jesus. So frankincense has an incredibly long history, about 6,000 years of human history of use of frankincense. And it's a tree resin. It's a resin that from tapping, making a small wound in a tree, it will ooze out, and then it can be collected. And those trees grow in only certain places in certain countries. They're endemic species to where they grow. And the protection of the sacred tree became like a calling. It wasn't something that I necessarily set out to do or knew that I would take a major stand in. And it's not been an easy ride. When you stand up for the environment, there's quite a bit of backlash. I've had a lot of death threats. Was kidnapped for a few days. I was locked up in a compound for a while. I was arrested a few times. Went through a lot of trials and tribulations. And that really even just taught me more patience and more strength. Yeah. That we actually were really doing something right if trying to protect trees, people
off enough to make them want to kidnap you and issue death threats.
Right. So, so those have calmed down. But the work still continues. And right now, my focus in frankincense is very strongly focused on propagation and how to grow them in nurseries and how to do reforestation efforts with them. Now, the frankincense, the chemistry of frankincense has a lot of similarities to cannabis. There's terpenes in frankincense that are also occurring in cannabis species. And there was some emerging research happening at the Aromatic Plant Research Center by my colleague, Dr. Satyal. And I started reviewing some of what he was doing, and I got really interested in the crossover, and it just sort of snowballed from there. I am fascinated by the plant compounds that give the smell. So the terpenes are what you smell.
Right.
Right. And that different plants can produce the same terpenes.
Yeah.
That's very fascinating to me. And they can also make completely different ones. But that there's this synergy between cannabis and frankincense was pretty interesting to me.
I've been fascinated talking to herbalists who will talk about making preparations with cannabis, but also other plants which have the same terpene profile.
Yeah.
Based on the therapeutic, in a way to boost the therapeutic effect.
Absolutely.
Of whatever
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And I have seen cannabis frankincense products. There's a local company. I've seen it at the apothecary in Burlington. There's a tincture that they have in there that's a frankincense CBD.
Wow.
It makes a lot of sense to me to take those two in combination.
What is frankincense generally used for?
Well, historically, frankincense was burned in temples and in place of worship. It helps the mental focus and sedate and calming to the brain. People also burn it to drive off snakes or to, as a fumigant to purify the air in the home. If you're taking it as an oil, as a topical oil, it's incredibly good for the skin. It is considered anti-aging for the skin. I call it just healthy.
Right.
And anti-inflammatory. There's also a lot of other claims about frankincense that either don't have enough studies or the studies really are not robust enough for me to publicly want to talk about them, because then sometimes people get, oh, this is a plant that could do everything. And then that has unintended consequences on that plant because then everybody wants that plant.
Right.
And maybe the claims were overblown. But there are definitely good mental calming effects from the use of frankincense, and it is definitely shown to be anti-inflammatory for the skin and very helpful for the skin. So
my sense from looking at APRC's website is that it's a fairly technically based organization. That's scientists, there's a lot of research. The publications that you're putting forward, for the most part, seem to be highly technical.
Yeah, they are.
So I was curious, so you've just put together this short video, it's about 9 minutes long, about cannabis, and it's kind of Cannabis 101, little history, humanity history, political history, prohibition history, what's happening right now, what the plant is good for. It's a much more, it looks like it's geared for a much more general audience. Yeah. What was the impulse behind wanting to do this video?
Yeah, the impulse was to be able to demystify what hemp is and what it is not. Mm-hmm. There's still, again, like outside of the liberal bubble, there are still a lot of misconceptions about hemp. And we understand that a lot of the viewership, or a lot of people in general, really don't understand a lot of the distinctions that we in the plant world just take for granted. And so we felt like it was really important to produce, it's called Straight from the Source. It's a series that I do, and I've done it on several other species. And my approach is really to make information accessible for a general audience. Mm-hmm. I do the scientific publishing in the papers, but it's not my favorite. Mm-hmm. Really, what's my favorite is being able to communicate to people directly so that we're all understanding the beneficial uses of the hemp plant rather than the technical, the more technical nitty gritty, which is important as well. But right. So the goal of that video was to kick off a series of videos that are coming behind it around the profiles of small farmers or individual growers who are now engaging in growing hemp. And so the informational video is to really help the general population understand what hemp is and what it's not, and what are some of the issues around it. This is very confusing. You know, you hear, oh, it's legal in one state, it's not legal. Hemp is sativa, but sativa has THC, and all these different complexities. And I think one of the biggest problems with all the complexities is someone who might benefit from CBD might turn away from it because of that, because they just don't understand.
Right.
It's too new. They're not from cannabis culture, so it's very new to them, and it could really potentially be something beneficial for them, but yet they just turn away because they don't really understand. Yeah. The other thing is for people who don't want to use it at all, but support the industry and identify that this is an important industry for the United States. It's a growth sector. It could be quite important to farmers, especially family farmers who are struggling. And so in that regard, whether or not someone's interested in using CBD or cannabis in any form, I still want to give them an opportunity to either accept and embrace, wow, this is a good industry for our country and for our farmers, and to recognize the differences, that there's hemp is grown, it doesn't get you high. Right. And so that for people who that's a concern, which I understand, and I don't make fun of that in any way, shape, or form, because it's serious, especially with young people, should really not be consuming THC, that they have an opportunity to understand those nuances, so that they don't have to just throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. So this is intended for a general audience.
Absolutely. This all of my straight from source videos are intended for a general audience. So I've done them on other species like black spruce, which grows in Canada, and an essential oil is made from it, to really bring people into the field to be able to see what the topic is. Mm-hmm. So that intro video I did, I'm not in the field, but in some of these other videos that are coming, I'll be in the field with the farmers.
That's so great. So, you know, we've talked to hemp and CBD activists like Doug Fine, or we did a 420 interview with Dan Harrer yesterday, son of Jack Harrer, who wrote Emperor Wears No Clothes. And you will hear these aspirational claims around hemp can save the world in its many guises, from medicine to industrial uses to replacing plastic, oil, energy, food, everything, which is great. But given that, sort of bring it back around to this question around climate change, and fundamentally we're dealing with a systems problem. Right. And we've got these large scale systems which have oil massaged into them, and they're fundamentally unsustainable, and a worshiping of a sort of capitalist growth mentality, infinite growth also being unsustainable. So we can't just, there's two issues here. One is you can't just toss hemp in the hopes that it's going to replace all the bad stuff. You can't do a one-to-one replacement of bad stuff for good stuff. There's larger systems change that needs to happen. Yeah. There's also a degree of urgency around this, given where we are in both in the progress of climate change. So how do we get from here to there, in any kind of meaningful time frame?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, you know, I really love the work that so many people have done to get us to where we are now, and that they, like some of the guys you just mentioned, they really stepped out before it was socially acceptable to really be an advocate for cannabis. And a lot of people took a lot of risks to their personal life, to their own finances. And I salute all of them, because I'm coming on their heels where I can talk openly about hemp, and there's nothing that's going to happen to me. And that really wasn't the case even a decade ago. So I understand the enthusiasm and how hard they've worked, a lot of these activists, to get us to where we are now. And of course, hemp is one of the plants that can help save us. But it's, like you said, it's part of a system. It's not just hemp. Because one of the things that I've really noticed is that you can either grow hemp sustainably or you can grow hemp unsustainably. Right. So you can grow hemp like any other monoculture. I've seen 100-acre plus farms of hemp where they've sprayed and plastic to keep all the weeds down. The plants are being mass produced. The soils were really in trouble. They were having to just, they just add fertilizers. They're not building soils.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just as problematic to me if that was any other crop.
Right.
So one of my good friends, Keith Morris, said to me one time, said, we can't just assume, people just tend to assume that, oh, hemp is sustainable. If it's hemp, people are growing it sustainably.
Right.
And that's not the case. So we have to really be just as diligent in asking for accountability and transparency and sustainability in growing hemp as we would in any other crop or plant or anything else. So people should know where they're getting their hemp from. They should know how it was grown. Mm-hmm. Not just, and they should also have the bottle that they buy should be thoroughly third-party tested, and that should be completely accountable and transparent for the consumer. But they should also know how that hemp was grown and what was the process of growing that hemp. Is the farm restoring soils?
Right.
Is the farm building soils along with growing crops? Is it intercropped? Because you cannot grow hemp year after year after year on the same piece of soil. If you do, you have to increase your inputs in terms of pesticides and all kinds of other things to control for, because it's not meant for that. It's meant to be intercropped. It's meant to be rotationally cropped. And so in that way, it is part of a system that is working in a web of life kind of model, and an agro-ecological model of growing things instead of monoculture. And so I really love that you brought up that point, because I'm just starting to write some popular articles that'll be published soon around this topic of, we can't just assume that because it's hemp, it's sustainable.
Right.
And we really have to be diligent, just like we are with anything else.
So it's, part of the challenge of the education then is not just educating people about the plant itself, but about these agricultural processes. So they need to understand, like we've learned with organic versus not organic, or GMOs, or anything which might be problematic. You don't, under any circumstances, want giant monocrops versus anything. And then helping people understand, okay, organic's about the soil, but in a way, you need to go even farther into regenerative and restorative practices.
Absolutely.
And all that permaculture wisdom that people like Keith have, so that the way we're doing what we're doing is always in benefit to the planet, not just, and again, it's sort of like, you can't just stop doing bad things, and you can't just do good things.
Right.
Given the extreme nature where we are now, we have to do things which are actually going to heal and repair the world. Yeah,
the joke is that the farmer of the future needs a PhD to understand all the complexities.
Right.
Whether it's a literal PhD or figuratively, but to understand all the complexities around climate change, soil erosion, all the different things that are facing us, the economic ups and downs, the market trends, all the complexity. I mean, it's a hard job to be a farmer. The amount of complexity is mounting every day on farming because our ecological and our environmental situation is getting more and more serious. So all of those things, I mean, even with wild crafted or collected items like frankincense, it's not grown in plantations. The trees are out in the wild and forest. It's hard sometimes for the harvesters to gauge when the rains are going to come, to know when they can tap, because climate change has changed the rain cycle so much. There's been droughts, the rains come early, they come too much, not enough, it's become unstable. And so farmers are contending with that every single day. Yeah. And so those complexities are something that we call in restorative agricultural practices is building resilience in diversity. So if you're just growing one crop, you're very vulnerable. You're extremely vulnerable. And so really diversification has a lot of complexities for farmers to embrace in and of itself, because it's a different model than what a lot of them are accustomed to, but it's the trend of the future. Yeah. I mean, even the United Nations has said that small farmers are the way forward. We need big farms too, but we need more and more small farms, regional farms producing staple items in an ecological way to protect the environment overall. We we do need some space on this planet that's not developed for
Yeah.
anything, not
Right.
developed for agriculture, not developed for anything other than biodiversity, wildlife, spiritual connection for us to be in those areas. But for planetary systems like the climate to regulate themselves, we do need landmass that is not developed. So we're pretty close to our boundaries. That I've read some data recently that some scientists feel like we have about 60 years of topsoil left.
Yeah.
At the rates and in the ways that we use our farmable, our arable land. And so that's a daunting statistic, because it takes 100 years to make a very small amount of topsoil in nature. Now we know how to speed that up, right?
Right.
We know how to speed that up and how to make compost and how we can enrich that or inoculate it with mycorrhizal fungal spores and to create it, that process faster. So that's what I mean when I say we know how to do a lot of this. It's the investments into those kind of technologies and us coming together in groups to make that happen is more what's in the way than not knowing how to restore soils. But if we keep going business as usual, that's, I probably won't be alive for that. I doubt it. But that's definitely pretty close around the corner for the younger generations.
For sure.
That's not just like, oh, everything's fine and then just run out. That's decline all the way along those 60 years.
Right.
And reducing the amount of arable land available means that there's been severe degradation, that those lands are no longer productive at all.
Yeah.
They're not going to just, a forest isn't going to just grow back on them. If
Right.
they're severely degraded, if the topsoil has been eroded down so that you're down to horizons of the soil profile that don't sustain life, that land is quite destroyed. And we do have a lot of land that has already gone through that process.
Yeah.
And it's hard to bring it back. It's not that it's impossible, but it's harder to bring it back after it's been completely degraded than to start to shift course.
Yeah.
Lands that are still productive.
You know, what's interesting to me is that much like we can't grow food via monocrops anymore. We can't look at singular issues anymore. We have to look at them in the context of everything that else is going on. So when we talk about cannabis, we can't even just talk about issues specifically related to cannabis, whether it's legalization or whether it's, you know, the best way to, you know, produce cloth out of hemp or the best way to get medicine out of, but whatever it might be. We have to have a recognition of these larger systemic issues because they're part and parcel of sort of the why and the how of everything that we do.
Absolutely. If anything, this COVID has really shown us how interconnected we are.
Yeah.
If we didn't know that already,
Right.
I think we really got the message here.
Right.
That we're, you know, we started out with one case. You know, and we're so interconnected. We move around the globe so much. Our lives count on each other. Yeah. And that's why, again, I was pondering this. We're all in this together. We're all nature in this together.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, destruction of forests is partly what leads to these zoonotic diseases increasing.
Right.
Right. Because with loss of habitat, and people also being in food insecure situations where they're eating bushmeat, right? And also some of these cultural paradigms that allow for that to go on.
Right.
But this destruction of natural habitats is definitely part of why these viruses can jump, and the kind of abuse of wildlife animal markets and the abuses to animals, because we somehow think we're dominant over them, or we justify it by saying they're not sentient, which, what does that matter? I mean, I think they are anyway, have feelings, but even if they don't, it's still creation. And how dare we treat it with such callousness to the point where we take a creature like a civet and put it in a cage, and it's horrifying. And I'm not saying that people can't use animals responsibly. I mean, I'm not trying to pitch a vegan extremist position here. I'm all for veganism. I'm kind of a omnivore. I'm like 80% vegan and the rest a little bit of a Vermont omnivore.
Right.
But I'm not saying that we can't use ecology, we can't use plants and animals. We have to do it with balance and respect for the partnership, and that my health is as tied to the ecology and the ecology's health is tied to my health. It is an interconnected relationship that is inextricable. I mean, we are completely linked. And so we are nature in this together. We are all nature in this together. And so to me, hemp has really taught me that a plant can give and give and give, to the point where you ask, who's growing who now?
Right.
Right? Who actually is, what's happening with this relationship, right? We took a plant, I guess it's similar to frankincense, about 6,000 years of history or so. And we've been moving this plant all around the globe with us. We've been planting it for fiber. We've been planting it for seed, for food and medicine. We've been planting it for flowers to make medicine and also for recreation. And so who's planting who? That relationship is so interconnected, right? The plant's done a very good job making humanity fall in love with it, right? Very smart plant. It was like, hee, watch this. I can get this person to fall in love with me and take me to, take me to South America. And that's exactly what's happened. And so in that regard, the very, very successful plant species we're dealing with here. In fact, I'll have to ask another scientist this, but at first glance, I would have to say that this plant is unique in that way. There's some others similar to it, that we've totally fallen in love with it, that we understand all the beneficial uses of it, that we've known that for thousands of years, and that we've taken it everywhere we've gone.
Yeah.
I think maybe Antarctica is about one of the only places you can't have, but maybe they've got them in their indoor greenhouse.
We don't know what's happening down in McMurdo, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a really great, that's a very good Michael Polanyi sort of argument around who's in charge of what.
Yeah.
So let's say someone sees the video who didn't really know or understand and says, okay, great, I believe you, I'm in. How do I help? What do you tell them?
Well, actually, that's a question that I'm in somewhat looking to the community, to the cannabis community, to see how the work that we're producing at APRC can be helpful to the community from the standpoint of, yes, we're a tried and true group of hard scientists. We're able to do analysis, but we're also able to communicate that to the general public, and we felt like that was a service we could give. So we don't buy and sell cannabis. We don't make cannabis products. The labs do test hemp. Okay. They do test hemp. In the labs are based in Utah. The analytical labs are in the state of Utah, where they do hemp testing for Utah-based farmers and growers and products from other companies that they're legally allowed to ship across state lines, not THC-rich products. And so APRC, with its extensive background in testing for purity and adulteration in essential oils, it just seemed like such a natural fit. And there were really no other labs in the state of Utah that could rise to the challenge. And as you know, Utah legalized medical cannabis usage, right, and hemp, of course, is legal everywhere. So an opportunity opened up for APRC labs to become much more involved in the testing aspect and detecting adulteration or purity. And so that's the service that the lab does for a fee. That's a fee for service. The educational stuff is free. The educational materials are free because that's part of our mission at APRC. And I'm really fortunate because I get to do a lot of that educational material. So I'm really happy that I get to share. It's very much in my professor genes. Yeah. To share information. And so I really love being able to do that, to do research on plants, and then to be able to communicate that.
That's fantastic.
So we're just hoping that we can help in terms of educational materials. There's people who have extensive background and understanding of cannabis who are incredible specialists who know a lot more than I do. But as a generalist on this, and with a background in this, we hope to be able to provide those educational services.
So we would say folks in the cannabis community who they see potential for collaborating with you in terms of information or educational, they should just reach out and say
Absolutely.
hi. Okay.
Absolutely. And people should reach out if they want to say something like, you got this right in your video, but you didn't do this and you should have. Or, I'd be happy to interview other experts, look for collaborative opportunities. I've been discussing it with leadership at APRC about how we could get involved in some of the university partnerships that are already in existence between private labs and universities for doing research ongoing. But right now I'm writing a series that will go into some industry publications for the flavor and fragrance industry, which is now quite interested in what is this CBD stuff, right? There's so much talk about CBD. Well, how does that translate for the essential oil, the perfume makers, the dietary supplements, flavor industry? What is it all about this CBD stuff? They're like, whoa. And there's so much variation with regulation globally that there's a lot of questions that I feel just on that alone. Like, why can't CBD go into a product that I sell across the whole United States or things like that? And so at all those different levels, we just want to be able to, debate the material. Of course, there's been a few folks who've debated me on some of the educational materials that we put out. And I'm happy when that comes up, because then we can look at something. There's so much expertise that's been underground for decades on growing the cannabis species. And this is a new time when we can be more forthcoming and discuss it, in forums without having to worry. I was in a workshop last year at the Hemp Intensive, and the teacher stood up and he was showing slides, and he turns around, he looks at us and he says, this is the first time I could ever show this, and it's not Exhibit A. He was showing us his great grow and this whole thing, that really made me laugh. So it's a new age of exploration for us to have open conversations. And I really do respect and understand that a lot of growers and formulators have proprietary methods that differentiate their product, and that they don't want to share that stuff. I mean, that makes perfect sense. But in the general realm, for us to share about hemp and about cannabis species and about the cannabis species across is really good for consumers and helps the industry overall. It's for people to understand if that's for you or not for you. It's always good to have open information.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, Dr. Anjanette Decarlo from the Aromatic Plant Research Center. Thank you very much. And I will encourage all of our cannabis community folks with their deep cannabis wisdom to contact you and get involved. And hopefully there'll be some good collaborative efforts that come out of it.
Great.
All right.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right. So.